So Daredevil has had a bunch of iconic villains and enemies over the years, including the Kingpin, Elektra in some cases, Bullseye, but none of them quite reach the same brutality, or in a lot of cases, become as intriguing as the Muse. And with him being the villain of the new season of Daredevil coming up, what a perfect time to talk about it. Now the Muse, for how good his design and costume is, he is relatively an unknown and obscure villain, but that doesn't mean he is a bad villain, because in my opinion, he's a really interesting one as he goes on to terrorize the streets of New York, in which we see exactly that, because as we see in some random part of Brooklyn, we see an Inhuman trying to fight off and de-escalate this group of human attackers, because during the whole time of the story and point in Marvel, the Terrigen Mist just rolled around, turning a bunch of humans and awakening their inhuman genes, of course turning them into mutated humans with different powers, abilities, and looks. And humans are notorious for not liking or being resistant to change or things being different to them, so of course this newly mutated Inhuman is preyed upon and attacked. What these people's reasoning being, well, on TV and around we hear when you guys get powers, things get destroyed, places burn down. But with this Inhuman here only really having the power to have glow-in-the-dark snowflakes he can project, he isn't really a danger to anyone. But these people still say they're not taking a chance. Fortunately for him, or unfortunately depending on how you look at it, a third party intervenes. As a blip in the night, a swift savior taking out each and every one of these men within a blink of an eye, swiftly without mercy, killing them. And you will think, well, this mysterious person saved this Inhuman. Surely he's just going to give him a pat on the back and send him on his way. But of course it seems here this person, this mysterious stranger, doesn't discriminate, killing both humans and Inhumans alike. For whatever purpose, we will soon find out. But taking a look over at a private art gallery, we see one specific painting. A painting that apparently was specifically made and used with blood. The blood of 100+ people, which of course is twisted in its own way, but the owner here doesn't see it this way at all. He is more focused on the money, the attraction, the spectacle of this whole thing. How many people he can bring into doors to this little private gallery. Of course, with the police getting involved, it becomes a whole thing of legally, is this allowed? Can you have this up? But still, with this being private property, the owner still pushes for open doors. But later that evening, when everybody shows up ready to go in, take a look at this spectacle, suddenly there has been a giant revelation. The art has not only been defaced, but it has now become a clue in a running investigation. As it now goes on to say in more blood, you're only as good as your last performance, egging the police on that this is only the beginning, and whoever made this mural, this artwork made with pure human blood, is about to strike again. As going to the location that was posted there, we see a pretty harrowing scene. No, not any more artworks with blood, but full-on bodies this time, all almost taxidermied or positioned in certain ways, all of them specifically being Inhuman. And of course with Daredevil and his current tutelage, Sam Chung, who is also the vigilante Blindspot, but for now they are under their civilian identities. And so with them doing a little snooping around, suddenly Daredevil hears something, with his extraordinary senses of course, and so he immediately goes to pursue. With him quickly rushing up the stairs, changing from his civilian clothes to his Daredevil persona, he makes note of something, that someone on a nearby rooftop is watching. With him furthering making mental notes saying, every cop likes to shoot out the idea that criminals like to return to the scene of the crime. But that usually isn't the case. You know, criminals aren't idiots. Even the dumb ones aren't that dumb. The exception, of course, being people like arsonists. They come back, or rather they don't even leave in the first place. They like to watch the fire, the burn. But in this case, Daredevil goes on to hypothesize that this guy, he isn't a criminal. Or at least he doesn't see himself that way. He sees himself as an artist. The thing, the scene he made down there with all of the bodies is one of his works, unveiled for the first time. And yes, as we finally get to see in pure clarity, it's the Muse, in which he has a pretty horrifying design, almost seeming not human. With him first greeting Daredevil and asking him, did he like his work? And you know, his design is pretty horrifying enough, but it gets even worse from Daredevil's perspective, because as you know, he is blind and sees the world in a completely different manner than any normal person would. And so in that case, we see what Daredevil perceives as the Muse, or more specifically the lack of, because to Matt Murdock, the different scents, sounds, it's like he's drawing them into himself, a literal black hole for sensory information, which is almost a direct weakness to Daredevil and his incredible senses, because it makes him incredibly hard for Daredevil to get a lock on him, to fully even perceive him. But the Muse is less worried about, oh, here's a vigilante, a superhero here to confront me. He is more just worried about his artwork, specifically going on to ask Daredevil, don't make me beg now, just tell me if you liked my work or not. With obviously Daredevil being in objection to Muse referring to people's mutilated bodies, blood-stained artwork, Inhumans and humans alike being murdered just for Muse's amusement, with Matt even starting to initiate a battle throwing his billy club at the Muse. But as we will find out, Muse is every bit as capable as he is a psychotic serial killer. Now it is never specifically stated what exactly his abilities are or the origin of them, if he's somehow just born with these, a lab experiment, whatever, but for his powers and abilities what we do know is he can suck in and block all types of information like sound, light, scent, etc. And he is also pretty strong and pretty fast, almost superhumanly so, as he grabs and breaks Daredevil's billy club like it was nothing, before going on to say, "I am an artist, and as an artist I hold a strict code, never explain and never apologize." For example, him just pulling out and doing one of the most randomest things, grabbing a grenade, pulling the pen and just letting it explode as Daredevil hurries his best to get out of the blast radius. But even though it looked like a grenade and an explosion, we soon find out that it was nothing more than a flashbang, a clever disguise and performance to hide his escape. Because as you can probably put together, the Muse isn't just going out like the Joker, just random chaos killing for fun. He has a very specific purpose. He's an artist above all, an intellectual. And so because of such, he wants to put on a performance, one up himself with every scene, every display, every artwork that has a certain meaning. It's only going to get worse. But so with Muse escaping, or what the media is starting to call him, Vincent Van Gogh, we take a little bit of a slight detour because, while Daredevil is, Daredevil, he still is Matt Murdock. And with him trying to get more information about everything that's going on with this new individual, and with him going on this murder spree, it eventually leads him to Medusa, the queen of the Inhumans, because just like the normal citizens of New York, the Inhumans are also being targeted. So Daredevil goes to the queen for answers. And after some light arguing and even a little bit of a scuffle, he eventually is told just straight up, no, leave, get out, it doesn't concern you, leave. Which at first is pretty harsh, how could the queen let her own people, the Inhumans, her own kind, just be slaughtered in the streets and not do anything about it? But as we will soon find out, on behalf of her and the rest of the royal Inhuman family, they have their own little Black Ops team trying to contain the threat of Muse. But with hogging all the information and whereabouts and what they know about the situation so far, they are not allowing Daredevil, with the rest of the New York police and other agencies to help along with the investigation and catching him. Meaning in the meantime, before the royal family can get to him, more people could be murdered. And that is just a risk that the queen is willing to take for her reputation and power being, queen of the Inhumans. Which is exactly what Daredevil doesn't want, because just as they are here, the Muse has found new targets, specifically in the form of a judge, who later on this will become clear why he targeted him specifically. But Daredevil, in the middle of the Inhuman city, he is not close enough to do anything about this. Fortunately, remember the sidekick or tutelage from earlier? Blindspot was fortunate enough to be actually here in attendance, but he isn't ready. He is just frankly a sidekick. He is Robin before he became Nightwing. He isn't a full-fledged hero yet. But with him being the only one here to even be able to stand up to Muse, he is the best they're going to get. So after the Muse kidnaps this guy, even going on to kill a few people on his way out, he moves inhumanly fast, with Blindspot only having mere seconds to change into his hero gear and follow. Fortunately, Blindspot's main ability is, being a blind spot, being untraceable and very silent, invisible due to his high-tech suit that he's developed, running after him and tracking him all the way down to the sewers, where we find out a little bit more about Muse and his overall arching goal. Because as he finally sets the kidnapped judge down, we see that the judge isn't alone. There are a couple other peoples, 3 more to be exact, and that this new art piece, this new spectacle that the Muse is creating, is one about modern injustices, with him even proclaiming it's time to create. And create what, you might ask? Well, as we find out, this time his next art piece is going to be focused on the one thing that has been giving him trouble this entire time: the legal system, specifically a judge, a politician, and 2 cops. The entire legal system from start to finish. But these aren't just random people he picked up and decided. These are specific people who has hindered him. The 4 people who have decided to shut down the public's access to his blood mural from the beginning, the art. And before he goes to start hurting them or cutting them up, he then has a second to thinking that he is missing something, that there is a specific piece not connecting. Right before he just goes and starts to cut one of the guy's ears off, saying, yes, the only approach to things like this, sometimes you just need to start cutting. Fortunately for the rest of the normal civilians here, Blindspot, this new vigilante, finally arrives, tracking him down. And to the Muse, this isn't some sort of deterrent or, aw, dang it, the hero was here, my plans are foiled. No, if anything, this makes him even more excited, because in his mind, this is perfect. This is the last missing piece he was thinking of. Of course, in this world, in a Marvel universe, justice isn't just in the hands of the law or normal police, judges, whatever. There are superheroes, vigilantes, people who go outside of the normal standards of law and enact justice. And so with the Muse going to chase Blindspot down to capture him, there's a little bit of a struggle in chasing, and everything the Muse does is just unsettling. It's almost grotesque in the way he moves, with him even crawling on the wall somehow, like Spider-Man, slowly taunting and then eventually blindsiding Blindspot, getting him down to the ground. Fortunately, Blindspot, being true to his name, is able to become a Blindspot himself, going invisible and escaping his sight, because this was his plan all along: lead Muse away from the kidnapped civilians and get them to safety. Them going down to different sewer drain tunnels with Muse right behind them. But because the situation is so dire and Muse is right on their trail, Blindspot has no time to get him to safety with the other civilians. He is sending them now for Blindspot to be almost a sacrifice, a distraction, because finally as they arrive face to face once more, Blindspot decides to do what he does best: run and use his high-tech suit to disappear once more. But unfortunately for him, his suit is out of batteries, out of charge. So instantly with his plans out of the window, he makes a run for it. A run for it out of the sewers where he can finally see daylight, but just as he is about to leave, he is dragged back down, but not before calling to Daredevil, giving his last location, as the Muse finally gets his hands on him. And of course with the Daredevil rushing over soon after, he finds just Blindspot's phone, knowing that the Muse has got him. And this of course eats at his soul, because just like Batman with Jason Todd, taking someone, a younger student, under your care as a hero, and then something happening to him is almost the worst thing imaginable. For all Daredevil knows, Blindspot is already dead, with him even saying to himself, "No, I am not alright. A monster has stolen a person who was relying on me to guide them, to keep them safe, and now he's gone." With Daredevil now taking a time to sit down and just focus, because previously, as you know, the Muse is almost like a blind spot to him. He can hardly sense and barely perceive him in the first place, with him just sitting down right in the middle of the road and starting to focus. And here I love when we get to see more of Daredevil's extraordinary powers, because yes, he is a very formidable opponent, being in the top 10 most skilled Marvel combatants in hand-to-hand combat, but whenever we see things from his perspective, with his unique abilities and sensory powers, I don't know, I just really love it in my opinion. So that's exactly what we see here, Daredevil focusing each of his senses, not only just around him, but to the entire city, thinking there has to be some way to track Muse down, some way to get a location on him. And fortunately enough, there is, because Muse's ability, you know, him sucking in all type of sensory information, is bad for Daredevil, but good also at the same time, because instead of just looking for something making a lot of noise or giving out a lot of information, he just now has to focus in on whatever isn't. The Muse is essentially a void. He's nothing. And if there's one thing Daredevil being blind is good at, is seeing nothing. With him focusing and pushing himself so hard, he literally starts to bleed. But eventually, he is able to see the void and locate him, as we see firsthand where Muse took Blindspot's body. You know, back to his lair, back to his secret hideout, if you will, back to his workspace. As you see a grotesque open area of a bunch of different body parts, blood, skulls of different people, creatures, with him even revealing to Blindspot that these are the washed away pieces, the bad ideas, the missteps after hours of frustration to make his masterpieces of art, in his own words, and this is the stuff that gets left behind. And then of course Blindspot goes on to tell him, you don't really have to do this. But in Muse's perspective, he 100% does, because as he goes on to say, don't you think I have already told myself that? After that first one, some random woman, I made her into something abstract. And then I told myself I shouldn't, that it was wrong, but it didn't feel wrong. You see, the truth is, when I'm creating, when I'm making, I am strong and I am right. Because if he doesn't do this, then who will? But all of that is old news. Now there's only one big question. What is he going to do with Blindspot? Unfortunately for Blindspot, that is a question that he isn't going to get answered now, as Daredevil then arrives smashing through the window to confront the Muse. And of course Daredevil is all angry that his protege, his friend and sidekick, is beat up and about to be tortured and turned into some kind of sick art. The Muse, on the other hand, isn't bothered a word. He's just like, okay, sure, whatever. But then something stands out to him, something strikes him, as he looks at Blindspot with a new sort of perspective, with him finally figuring out what he is going to do to him. As he says, he is suddenly feeling inspired, as he literally plucks two fingers and gouging out his eyes, turning Blindspot, well, simply Blindspot. But with the Muse now tossing his body and trying to get away, Daredevil is not going to let this happen, especially not now after seeing his sidekick brutally being blinded. And so a little bit of a scuffle ensues. And like I've said before, Daredevil is definitely within the top 10, maybe even top 5 if you really want to push it, hand-to-hand combatants in the Marvel Universe. And for Blindspot here to even be able to keep up and get some hits of his own in, that means he is no slouch. Eventually though, he judo tosses him through a little wooden wall, and Daredevil finally sees it. Dozens, if not 100+ bodies of people being drained for their blood. The same blood that was used at the beginning of the story for the Muse to use within the painting. And it's crazy when you think about it, because all of this torture, all of this destruction, chaos that the Blindspot is causing and lives almost being ruined, to him, of course this is not bad or evil or anything. To him, this is nothing more than artistic expression. He's just expressing everything within his mind, creating it in the physical world. Of course, with that being in his own sick and twisted way. With him even going on to further rationalize his way of thinking, asking Daredevil, why do you even care about these people? Do you not realize they're better off like this than they were before? Their lives now finally mean something. It doesn't matter if they die here. Within the art he creates, they will become immortal. With him chopping down on the support structure, letting all of the bodies drop, some of the people who still might be alive and Daredevil can save. So he does just that, rushing over to stop the thing from falling. But at the same time, the Muse is starting to get away. And if he gets away, who knows, maybe he might even just hop cities, spew all of this carnage and bloodshed just a couple miles away. Fortunately though, Daredevil is able to improvise improvised using one of his billy clubs to stop the fall, just in time to make it to the rooftop to see that his job is already done. The Muse has been caught, as we see dozens and a whole squad of agents finally arrive to apprehend the Muse, these specifically being inhuman agents sent from the Queen herself. And you know, Daredevil isn't perfect, you know, of course he wants justice and is a hero, but he, just like any other normal person, would of course want revenge or vengeance, or better yet, justice, especially seeing what the Muse did to his protege Blindspot, literally blinding him permanently, with him asking he took his eyes, how will he be punished for that? And here we see frankly one of the most interesting interactions throughout this entire story so far, with the Muse going on to literally break and crack his own fingers, holding him up to Daredevil, asking him, this is what you were going to do to me, right? Something like this, making it impossible for me to create art again. But don't worry, I am happy to do it myself. It is better for the story. Because yes, as an artist, sure, you can make a masterpiece, but what value is a masterpiece if you make 100 more after that? But if you make one masterpiece and suddenly something happens to the artist and he can't create anymore, that one masterpiece becomes timeless. And with this whole situation even freaking Daredevil out himself, he just has one question left on his mind. Who is he? Who is this Muse? With him going to finally pull back the curtains and his mask off, as we see just who this individual is. In almost a horrifying panel, he simply says he is just a man in a mask. No, he doesn't see himself as a villain or this grand figure with the overarching goal like world domination or anything. To him, he is simply just a man in a mask, a man with artistic desires, willing to go above and beyond to express them in his own twisted and gruesome way. But as this inhuman police squad goes to take away the Muse for punishment or wherever they're going to capture him and hold him, we then see Daredevil finally meet up with Blindspot after his tragic accident, with Blindspot simply asking him, did you save them? And of course, yes, Daredevil saved all of those people who were being drained of their blood, more than 100+ lives saved. And so because of this, Blindspot, or Sam, simply says it was worth it. Worth his own self-sacrifice, his literal eyes being blinded, if it meant hundreds of more people can go on and finally live to see another day. And this is a pretty sad story all around. In the end, of course, the bad guy was apprehended and lives were saved, but no one really came out unscathed. And even later on during another storyline, Blindspot is able to temporarily get his revenge after getting a new set of eyes or enhancements from the hand, just like Daredevil now not being able to just see like normally, instead having enhanced senses. He finally confronts the Muse once more, and through a series of actions and him almost losing control, Blindspot stops himself from killing the Muse, and instead the Muse decides to end himself, throwing himself into a pit of fire and slowly burning away, thinking if anything is going to end his story, his great life of art, it's going to be no one but himself, as he burns away into ashes on some random rooftop of New York, going out in nothing but a whisper, just like many of his victims did. But yeah, that was the entire story of Marvel's The Muse. Now, I am incredibly excited and curious to see just how far Disney is going to go within this new Daredevil series and how they're going to portray him in this entire storyline. Because while yes, it is pretty intriguing, it does get pretty gruesome and definitely not something that we have seen before within certain Daredevil villains. Saying all that though, that is the end of this video and the end of this story. If you have enjoyed, leave a like or subscribe if you're new and want to see more content just like this. As always, this was the Hero Informer, and thank you for watching.